In this video, I'd like to demonstrate for you a process for creating mockups for a toolkit. For me, it starts with wireframes. Now, these wireframes are pretty messy, and there's a varying level of fidelity with some color applied and some things like logos and the map image here applied. But overall, we're going to be focusing on the basic gist of the elements that are here. So if we just kind of scan through this site, it's a church website. There was a landing page, an About Us page, a ministries page, and each of these would drill down into details about each of the given ministries, a media page, a calendar page, and a contact us. Okay, so part of what I want to be doing in my toolkit is creating components that I can reuse so that I reduce the complexity of my style sheets and think through how to do things consistently and efficiently. So as I look through these, you can see I've used a variety of different styles in these wireframes. So there's definitely room to tighten up and be consistent. But similar components that exist are things like lockups like these, where there's an image or an icon over text, perhaps with a heading and some other things. There are variations of lockups like that, such as these, where this is just placeholder text for this what we believe section, but it's going to be kind of punchy main ideas about each of the core beliefs. And then here's another variation of the lockup idea where we've got like a face hole with the name and title of the pastor. Another variation, nope, looks like that's all the lockups that we have. Another thing that repeats is like a side-by-side module like this, where there's a graphic and text side-by-side. Here's another variation of that, and another, and another. And then here we actually have a side-by-side where there's an image next to a form. Okay, so there's room to kind of tighten those up and come up with something consistent. Especially in terms of heading treatment. Well, I guess that would be more of a typographical thing, but size of the image and the overall way that we're using the grid and things like that. This was just kind of quickly slapped together to get the idea across with the customer. Okay, so there's a need to create these sort of reusable components and certainly room to tighten up things like color, typography, some of the more basic things like button styles, input field styles like what we have over here in the form. Okay, so what we need to do is get busy. What I have over here in this other file is the start of what would aim to be a clean document that could be handed off to developers or used by you if you are the developer. So we're going to try to be precise and prescriptive, to be precise and prescriptive in what we're doing here. So my colors here are in progress, but what I do typically try to do is have the sort of midline tone shown on light and dark, and then also have a spectrum. So these two are done, where you can see the range and the different values. And I kind of code these as hundreds. So this is going to be considered like my 500, and then 4, 3, 2, 100, and then 6, 7, 8, 900. So 1000 would be full black, and 0 would be full white. I suppose you could flip it. Maybe it makes more sense to think of this as 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 6, 7, 8, 9, depending on the way you're thinking about light and color. But anyway, I do tend to try to have all those different tones so that I can use them consistently. It can be super easy to just use a base tone like this and then accidentally end up with all kinds of variations of it if we're not careful. So color and all the different tones is one place that we start. Hopefully this idea is familiar to you from your work with style tiles. Okay, next up, in terms of building blocks, we want to think through the grid. And if you've been using the grid approach that we covered in previous classes in the Koivin text, you may be familiar with the idea of starting with a baseline grid and laying out text along that baseline grid at different sizes in order to determine kind of what overall baseline grid is going to work at the various sizes that you need. So I settled in, given the fonts that I'm working with, I settled in on a 20 pixel baseline grid. And the other thing that's a Koivin approach is to consider how you're going to subdivide vertically as well as horizontally. And because I'm working with a sort of ideal device size of 1440, that gave me the pixels that are 80 pixels wide, or sorry, the columns that are 80 pixels wide with a 40 pixel gutter, and that's split 20 and 20 on the outermost columns there. So what ends up is, it ends up being a, like a 120 pixel columns here, with then 20 on each side and then 80 for meat in the middle. Okay, so that said, the 1440 divided by 1.618 is 889. So then I took that number and tried to figure out how I wanted to subdivide it in that vertical space, and decided that I wanted to do units about this size. So it turned out being 7 lines and then a 1-line gap for each of my kind of vertical units. And then 3 grouped together would sort of be the largest that I aim for, except for maybe something bold like the carousel or something like that. Then I consider how to adjust this down to the other sizes. And so basically what I resolved is that from 1080 up to 1440, we would flex 12 columns. But when we get to 1080 and below, down to 600, we're going to break to 6 columns. So if I have something that is, is like 6 items up, like one of my lockups, well, when I get down to 1080, it's going to switch and be like 3 up. Okay, and then we switch again around the 600 pixel mark. So from 300 to 599 is going to be just 3 column like this. Okay, so that is the grid established, and these are actually drawn out. So I can actually create slices of this and use it as an overlay or a background in my in the browser when I build this out, if I'd like to. Okay, next up we have the type being shown. Let me make sure that I'm at actual size here. So this is the smallest device width I would expect. It's around 1320, I believe, or maybe actually this one may be the wider typical phone today at 365 or so. And so it's at this size that I tried out all of the different type styles, from the lead type style, hyperlinks, bulleted lists, standard paragraphs. And then what I did is fleshed out 7 different, actually it's only 6 because I started at 2. In my mind, the H1 is always the logo, so I tend to start at display 2. But I did 2 through 6 because that's the number of headings we typically have. I designed a 7th so that we could basically have a little bit more flexibility for additional styling. And it turns out that at the mobile size, I think this is too large. So what I'd probably do at the mobile size is shift everything down. So this would be used for H2s, H3s, H4s, 5s, and 6s. But then when we get to the wider displays, probably at medium and up, we'd switch it, and this would be H6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then of course the H1 is the title. Okay, so note now that I've not just shown the styles, but I have actually even gone as far as trying to lay out, make sure that I'm using the baseline grid and be very consistent with the spacing. So first of all, I've made sure every line is on a baseline grid, and I am, looks like that one needs a little bit of work. Oh, I see. Some of these are at midpoints. Here I have a 10 pixel baseline grid. We said earlier that we're working on 20, and that's partially so that I can subdivide it. So some of my leading will be, well, all of my leading will be multiples of 10. So like, for example, the body here. So let me get my toolbars on here. Show layer list, show inspector. Okay, and by the way, I toggled the grid on here. You can go to view and then turn on show layout. You can also edit your layout settings here. So I'm going with the same row breakpoints, but I'm just using 10 pixels instead of 20, so I'm ending up with more kind of subdivision there. Anyway, what you can see here as I click through each of these type styles is every one of them uses a leading that is, well, it's supposed to, that lines up with the grid there. So this guy needs to be 20. And I'll tell you more about text styles in a moment. And then we're going to want to make sure that they line up on a baseline. That one, oh, I know. It's the line versus the paragraph. Yeah, okay. So the line the leading was still 20 points, but the paragraph break was just not adjusted. So that's normal. Okay, so 30 is this one is 30 as well. This one jumps up to 40, and this one jumps up to 50. So you can see every line should sit on or squarely between one of my baseline rows, and only between when we have large headings like this. All of the body copy should be very helpful in establishing that vertical rhythm, since we'll consistently have a baseline. Okay, but you can also see that I've thought through the spacing between these things. Because I'm making sure that they sit on a baseline, I'm also now looking at the space between, and I'm going to be able to gauge this as, you know, spacing along my baseline grid. So there's going to be a gap of, you know, 60 pixels here, and 40 pixels here, and 30, 20, 10, and stuff like that. Okay, so we are getting very nitty-gritty about this to ensure that we have a very consistent and strong sense of the grid being used, even in something as basic as these type styles. Okay, so meticulous is the key word there. Next up here, I have now moved into mocking up some of the usable components. So these were just like basic things like type and color and grid, right? But now, again, using my layout behind the scenes here, what I've started to do here is consider some of the section dividers or section headings. Okay, so these are not just standard headings. These are particular variations of the headings. And partially what I'm showing here, you can see I've used a white background intentionally against this light gray. The idea is to show this is the actual spacing I expect. There should be nothing inside of these spaces when we actually implement this. So the spacing between the top here and the top of the text should be actually set up in this component. So if this is an H2, that's probably going to be padding, and then I'll use maybe like an after pseudo element to get that border placed, that little divider placed as we want it. Okay, so I've got 3 different styles. A very prominent one, which will only be on tablet and desktop. For mobile, we'll switch down and show this one, but we can also use this one on all of them. And then this third one we would only see on mobile as the alternate for the second level, since we shift down for mobile. Okay, but again, spacing, even everything down to the way that this is centered in the box and the spacing between here, these are all meticulously thought out in round numbers, so that these numbers are all very consistent throughout our system. Next up, I thought through buttons. So we will be able to use buttons in any of our colors, and that's where you can see the different tones that I was starting to set up in my color palette will come in handy. This I'm only showing the secondary color here for these buttons, but the idea is we definitely want to always figure out what a normal style is, what a hover style is, and also what a focus style is. This becomes very important for accessibility and keyboard users who are tabbing through different the interactive features. So we've even done that same idea over here with hyperlinks, where we have standard hover style and then even the focus style. Okay, now I have an alternate style for my buttons where I don't want them always to be this heavy color. I'm using this flat or ghosted style where you get the background only on hover and the border over only on focus, so that you can see those. And then down here I'm just showing another option where how it can look if we have an icon beside it, such as a read more, little icon, or there's other places where we might do things like that. Okay, so with the interactive elements, we want to show those 3 states and make sure that they're noticeably different one to the other, while also fitting in with our style. All right, next up I've planned out my form fields. So single line, this should actually say multi-line, and then radio box check marks, single line, that's another little typo, that should be drop downs. Okay. So up here we have just the components shown in the different states. Now with form fields, we have the normal state, the focus state, which is what appears when you've actually clicked on it to enter text, or you have selected it here. And that sort of doubles as the active state. So as you tab through, you'll get to see that. We don't have any hover states on these. That's an optional thing you could do, but I don't know that hover states on fields are necessary. And then a disabled state. I've also shown a drop-down state for the drop-downs. Next up down here, we're actually showing different ways that these could be laid out with a label. So on the small size up to the medium size, we'll lay them all out in a single column. But at the medium and higher, we'll lay them out in two, in a side-by-side fashion. And as I turn on the grid again, you can see I've been very meticulous to make sure to lay these out on my grid. So I'm thinking very much about the spacing. And then also over here, you can see that there is the boundary of the white space, thinking about how wide that column is and how wide the form fields get. And I've actually left a single column gap over on the side there intentionally. Okay, so there is how we did the form fields. You can even plan out things like the way you're going to use your word marks or different logos that you have. So I have thought through what the full logo looks like, what a word mark only looks like, and then sort of a minimum size for this, and then finally a wide variation. So I may need each of these in different places on the site, and that might be part of a standard branding plan. But I'm implementing it here particularly so that I can think about the letting. Let's see, did I actually have that let set up here? Not that you can see in any meaningful way. Okay, so that kind of ends the sort of basic components. What we have next are the more compound things, which may be considered just more complex structures or more complex components, or actually structures in the toolkit framework terminology that we'll look at more in a little bit. So here we have the side-by-sides in showing the different responsive variations. So when it's at the widest size, we're not going to let it get super, super wide. We're going to kind of still keep it centered in the space. So in a 12 pixel or 12 column layout, it's only going to take up 8 of those columns with 4 and 4. Okay, and then 2 column gaps on the side. When we get down to the middle size, you can see that now we're in the zone where we can take up the full 6 columns that we have at that point. So it's still going to be a split 3 and 3. But when we get down to the smallest size, we're going to stack it all up in a single column. Okay. I also showed here what we would do if we had section headings over each of these. So I've made them semi-opaque so that they're not looking like they're trying to be part of this component, but yet I have them there so that we can imagine kind of the spacing between that border and down here. Okay, next up I have those repeating side-by-sides. So this is the variation such as on the ministry page where I had a whole bunch stacking up, kind of going down a whole long list. Whereas this is going to be kind of a standalone individual module. So in these, I'm going to keep the image width the same from large down to medium, but let the text size flex down to this smaller size. Then when we get to small, and there's a typo, we're going to snap down to stacking everything up. Next up, I have the lockups with 3 different variations of those to show. One with image, one with a graphic where you can imagine we might have some like light line work here instead of an image, and then the face hole variation for the pastors area. And it looks like my type styles here are supposed to be centered. There we go. Okay, so that's an overview of how you can mock things up. But let's now switch to some notes about technique, because there's all kinds of opportunities here to be much more efficient than just plain drawing all of this stuff. Drawing all of this stuff up every time. So one of those things is to make use of color swatches, so that when you're over in the colors panel and you want to apply one of your color system colors, you have them right there in the fills panel to drop them in. Let me see. So you would see them down here in the sidebar. So that may be something new to you. Let me just show you what that looks like for creating them. It's actually pretty straightforward. When you have a color selected, I'm going to go in and select my color, ignore that one. Basically all you do is you have the color and then you click the plus to add it to your system. Then you can even name it. So this is going to be my primary 400. Okay, now this one is actually my alternate. So I'm going to call this alternate 400. This one is my accent. This one is my secondary. And this one is my base. Okay, so then you can go through each of your other ones and add all of them in. But the beauty is that now anytime you want to apply that color quickly in context, all you have to do is select the thing, and then you'll have, so if I draw a new rectangle, drop down my color swatch here, and then all of my colors are there that I can quickly apply one of the colors that I want. Pretty nice. Okay, next up, the other thing you can do is start making use of styles. So type styles are one of those things. If you've used InDesign, you may be familiar with the idea of paragraph and character styles. Sketch only does block styles, so paragraph styles are the only option we have here. You can do some minimal inline formatting, but sadly they don't have a robust style feature for inline styles yet. But here you can see that what we did with our type styles is created actual type styles here in Sketch for each one of these styles that we had mocked up over here. So that means that anytime I create a new text block, I can just now go up to this appearance dropdown and choose one of the existing type styles to quickly and easily apply it. Okay, so that makes life short, or things simpler, and as with the other tools, if you decide you want to make things centered, say make this centered, make a change to it, you go here and you update text style, and that's going to update everywhere that style is used. So very nice, robust feature there. Okay, you can also do something similar with object styles. You may be familiar with that from InDesign. So here, for example, I have object styles applied to this symbol. We'll talk about symbols more in a moment. But here I can drop down and select the fill, base, or focus, or hover states. So you can see as I just click through here, each of these has those other different styles applied. And that makes short work of taking a base symbol like this and quickly applying variations to things like that shape in the background. Okay, so make use of those object styles to quickly and easily apply your colors in compound ways, and you'll be all the better off. Last of all, symbols are something very important to cover. You may have seen these. I'm not sure if you've ever used them, but they are an incredibly powerful feature that I just absolutely love about Sketch. The idea here is that you can take any selection of objects and then create a symbol out of them. So I have some already created. If I double click into a symbol, you can see the definition of that symbol. They're usually placed on individual artboards here in this symbols page inside of Sketch. When you've double clicked, you can return back to wherever you were by clicking that return to instance, or you can just switch between the two pages here with the page command. So what you can see I've done here with the button component or symbol is I have a background layer that's just a shape, and then I have a label that's the text field that was put in there. So there's a couple of really cool, powerful things. First of all, with each of these, I can define the way that they resize. So if I resize them right now, let me go back out and show you. If I take this button down and I stretch it around, that button is sort of by default going to flex with the edges of the resize, and everything is kind of staying centered. Well, that may not be what I want to happen. Perhaps I want to always kind of fix the button at that one size. Okay. Well, if I want to be certain that whatever I want is going to apply, you can use these settings over here. So these are the two things that allow you to pin things to edges or fix width and or height. And then you'll get a preview over here of how that works. So right now, everything is kind of set to flex. So I'm going to make sure that that's what happens by just clicking this middle. And now what's happened is it's pinned to all the edges, which means it's grayed out the width and height so that they are going to flex and not be fixed. So you can see as I go over here, it's flexing. Okay, now if I just say pin to the top and side edges and fix the height, now you can see as it flexes, that it's even if I resize the overall shape, the height of this thing is not going to change. So if I switch back here, you see that shape stayed the same height, but the width and everything else flexed. So that feels a little bit abstract for something like a button, but it's very helpful, you'll see in some of the other components as you begin to play with it. So with this one, what I did is I fixed it in the sides, but I'm going to let it stay centered. However, I wanted to fix its height so that we never get the text wrapping on the button. Okay, and then I actually want to fix this so that it really does not stay fixed height, but does pin to the sides. Okay, so in something like a form field like this, you can play around with the way this works, but the result of what I have right now is that I'm always going to have the same spacing. It's not going to scale, it's going to stay the same, so I have that gutter enforced the way I want it to be enforced. Same thing goes with these headings. I have these things pinned to the top and sides, but I'm going to let the height flex down. Now this thing I have pinned to the bottom, and I have given it a fixed width and height. So even if the space expands, I want that shape to stay the same size. You can see the result there as I hover is that it's going to stay pinned to the bottom, at least the same consistent spacing away from the bottom that it is right now, but it's going to stay the same size as it moves. Okay, so symbols are a super powerful feature that allow you to do responsive kinds of things, but here's another really amazing aspect of this. When you're out here outside of the definition using an instance of the symbol, certain aspects of it become editable or overridable. So for example, that label text field, I can actually type in new text. So view now. Okay, so that has not changed the initial value of the text there, but it allows me to override it. So I can use all the cool styles about this button, but adjust the actual text that appears anywhere in my document. So it makes it a whole lot easier to mock things up. The other thing we can do with these is adjust the text styles and the object styles that are applied. So that's all I did to create the variations in these buttons here. They're all instances of button. This one uses the this fill base style for the button style. This one uses the fill hover button style, and this one uses a fill focus, and it's just changing the background color on that background and border on that background as well. So if you set up your object styles and your type styles, and then you use them in combination with symbols, you actually gain a lot of power to do some very exciting things.